Management, ABIOSH FPSO Oil Rig Safety Manager, and MEBOSH International Certification in Oil and Gas Operations, or LLM International Oil and Gas Law. Check out their website for more information at nations.gy or email info@nations.gy.
Oil producing nation. But how much do you know about this valuable yet finite resource? On our radio program, Guyana's Oil and You, we strike at the heart of every issue with informed views and credible data. The time is now for you to arm yourself with insightful knowledge on your oil wealth. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this special edition, our end of year program for our radio show, Guyana's Oil and You. I am your hostess, senior journalist of Kaieteur News, Kiana Wilburg, and today we will be reflecting on Guyana's performance as an oil producing state, while considering the steps necessary for success in 2021 and beyond. I'm pleased to report that our panel for this critical discussion is not only diverse in its background, but also balanced in gender representation. We have two truly experienced and distinguished women on our panel today: international lawyer Miss Melinda Janke and Chatham House Associate Fellow Dr. Valerie Marcel. Joining them are two prominent and knowledgeable gentlemen. We have the former minister, Mr. David Patterson, who has served as who's currently serving as the head of the Parliamentary Public Accounts Committee, and he's also the executive member of the Alliance for Change Party. Also, we have Mr. Tom Sanzillo, the Director of Financial Analysis at the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. To the members of the panel, good morning again, and thank you for being part of this discussion.
Good morning,
Good
Kiana.
morning.
Oh, pleasure, my pleasure.
Great.
Morning,
So,
Kiana.
thank you very much. So, we'll head right into our discussion. I would like to give each member of the panel about 2 to 3 minutes maximum to present perspectives on Guyana's preparation for oil and its performance in its first year as an oil producing state. And I would like to have this discussion started with comments from Dr. Marcel, and then we'll follow with Mr. Sanzillo.
Well, thanks, Kiana. Obviously, I'm not in Guyana and participating in these preparations, so this is really an external perspective that I can offer. But it seems that there's been, for the last 5 years, really intense preparations for the production phase, and a tremendous amount has been done on local content, on the regulations, policies, and laws that are necessary to oversee oil operators in this highly technical, super expert sector. So that's very impressive. I think the big job in preparation on the economy is, I think, a mammoth task that is to get the supply base, get the skills, get the infrastructure, to be developed to be able to support the sector, but much more importantly than that, to be able to be productive in parallel to the sector, and so that the sector doesn't sort of take over everything. So I think there are so many things for Guyana to do in a very short amount of time, and so it can't be expected to have it all sorted. But I think it's been very impressive so far.
Thank you very much for that comment, Dr. Marcel. Over to you, Mr. Sanzillo.
Yeah, thanks for having me this morning, and for inviting me back. This is the second time I've been on the show.
Yes.
We put out a study a couple months ago and looked at this from a fiscal standpoint, and looked at the commitment, promise that were made, where the resources from the oil drilling would do one of three things, and eventually all three things, to pay bills at the end of the month, so to speak, close the government's deficit. It would allow the government to put money aside, build a fund like we've seen in other countries, and to engage in some new spending that have been put off because of deficits for a while. We have the end of the first year, and we had suggested that the money that would come in would not cover the current year fiscal deficit, and we were accurate. It didn't, and so the other two aspects of the arrangement of putting money aside or spending on new, we just don't know. We'll know next month when the budget comes out as to how they might want to use the. I think they said $185 million in the newspapers. But so, and during the budget announcement by Minister Edgehill, said that they didn't meet the production targets either. So there's no real fiscal target because nobody's disclosed any, and the one volume target, or how many barrels, it was not met in the first year.
Thank you very much for that, sir. Now, I'd like to turn our attention to two individuals who've been commenting, if not on a weekly basis, but at the very least on a monthly basis on Guyana's oil sector. I'd allow Ms. Janki to provide her perspectives on Guyana's preparation and her take on the performance for the first year.
Thank you very much, Kiana. I would say that Guyana is totally unprepared for oil, and has had really a disastrous year. You have a horrible, abusive, exploitative contract. We have strong laws in this country, yet we have a sector that is riddled with illegalities. You've heard the lie of vast wealth, when in fact we're going to end up with massive debt. And the oil curse is here. We started this year, January, with Global Witness telling the people of Guyana they would get 168 billion. Global Witness lied to you. You're not going to get 168 billion. Valerie said that the Global Witness report was like throwing a bomb into the election fray. And that was absolutely right. And I want to thank you for saying that, because it was spot on. The possibility of oil money destroys democracy. And we saw that just a few weeks later in the March election, when there was an attempt to steal the election by declaring fraudulent results. And of course, it didn't work, because the Guyanese people said no matter who they voted for, the country was united that they were not going to have electoral fraud. But we still had 5 months of an election fiasco. In August, there's a new government. In September, they approved Payara. Now, there are good grounds for saying that that Payara environmental permit is unlawful. There are good grounds for saying that the Payara petroleum license is unlawful under the petroleum laws. I've asked Minister Barrett to give his reasons for granting the Payara license. 2 months later, he can't provide an answer. They rush Payara through, and they hire Alison Redford to help them. Who is this? A disgraced Canadian politician who had to resign over a money scandal. And Kaieteur News has reported that she previously received money from an Exxon subsidiary. So the government's not protecting Guyana from an abusive deal, and they're rushing through things like Payara and helping ExxonMobil. And for the whole of this year, Esso has flared billions of cubic feet of natural gas. They're poisoning the air with chemicals. Those chemicals, some of them cause cancer. Flaring reduces greenhouse gases, which affect the climate system, damaging the climate. Mr. Jagdeo is on record as saying that climate change is an existential threat for Guyana, but the government does nothing about it. I've told the EPA the flaring was illegal. I told them to shut down Exxon's operations and make Exxon pay compensation, but they're not doing their job. All of this is the oil curse. Guyana is totally unprepared for oil.
Thank you very much, Ms. Janke. Mr. Patterson, you would have heard three interesting comments thus far on Guyana's preparation. From the view of the political opposition, what has been most telling for you in terms of Guyana's preparation? I know that prior to being in the political opposition, you were also part of the process in helping Guyana to prepare for oil and gas. So it would be interesting to hear you speak a little bit on that front, as well as your views on the performance of the country in its first year.
Thank you very much, Kiana, and good morning or afternoon, wherever you are, to my fellow panelists. First, Kiana, aside from the vexing issue of the conditions of the contract, including, of course, a continued narrative, which administration is more responsible for its contents or not. I mean, my view, as I share with Valerie, that I think that the country has made some progress in the oil and gas sector. And let me state on the contract and the contract negotiation calls that you've heard and they continue to hear. On behalf of the opposition, which I am now at, I mean, we are on record as stating that, and I repeat this now, that should the government want to make any changes which will ensure more benefits, because I do think we are getting some benefits now, but I think Thomas and everyone's understanding, of course, not the amount of benefits that persons would like. We, as the opposition, will provide unconditional support for any changes that the government would like to make. We never had that opportunity. That offer was never made to us when we were in government, but being that as it may, we, and I've stated it on record already, and I stated again, we will very willing to make support unconditionally the government in this endeavor. I think that in the last 4 years, we have as a country made remarkable progress towards forest oil. Remember that we've started a brand new industry, and I do understand several persons called about the need to be cautious as we approach forest oil. But we did make, and we have made remarkable progress as far as we are concerned. We as a coalition ensured all strategies, plans were implemented and grounded in fundamental principles. That is a good balance between the economics of production and protection of the environment, and ensure that the environment will never be compromised for production. There were bold actions and measures in place by the coalition when we did there, including fines, prosecutions. We had recommended modifications of the PRFDA and FDP permits based on the pitfalls, and we do acknowledge that there were pitfalls and lessons learned from LISA 1 and LISA 2. We had recommended certain issues. I mean, two great examples would be the question of flaring, as Melinda just mentioned, and the dumping of produced water in the ocean. We've also established, there's also established right now the Sovereign Wealth Fund to ensure that the oil and gas wealth is prudently spent and invested in the best interest of the country. Moving forward, we do reckon that we have to seriously examine the ability of Guyana to turn this oil wealth into more sustainable industries in the best interest of this country and its people. For Guyana to escape the fate of other oil resource rich countries, we need to ensure that it's equity in terms of access to this wealth and how it's invested in the population. So all in all, I do think the last year, or I mean, as I said, at the one last year as a oil producer, first year the oil producing nation was a learning curve, but I do think that we have done reasonably well as a country in our first year of oil. But we still have a long way to go, as everybody will acknowledge, but this is a reasonable first step, in our opinion.
Thank you very much, Mr. Patterson. Based on all of the perspectives that have been put forward, I'd like to ask Dr. Marcel. Guyana is part of the new producers group that is led by Chatham House, and it's provided this platform where we can take important lessons from other countries that are part of the industry and sort of navigate our way using some of the best practices that they perhaps have been implementing and have seen success with. Based on the role that you have to play in leading the new producers group and Guyana being part of that, Dr. Marcel, would you say that some of the issues you're now hearing, were these part of those discussions? That's one. And two, what are some important lessons you would try to ensure that Guyana at this particular point, this learning curve, ensure that it pays attention to so that it can avoid some of the pitfalls of the sector?
Yeah, thanks. I think there are so many to bring up, frankly. There's, I think one of the big issues is that I think when you're rushing to prepare after a discovery, to prepare the production phase, there are so many things to do, and the list is very long. All the regulations you have to draft, the institutions you have to set up. You can have trouble seeing the forest for the trees. And I think a common lesson across the group is that governments may forget to, or not take the time to stop and think, what is it for? What is the oil for? What are we going to do with the gas? What are we going to do with the money? How does this all fit into the bigger plan? What is the bigger plan? Do we need to completely change our bigger plan because of this? Or do we stay focused on what we had in sight before? I think those are real fundamental questions that almost all producers face, because after a discovery, there's such excitement and you're very focused on the different tasks that you have. Not to mention, you have all these consultants coming in to advise you and give you these sort of detail-oriented tasks and things to focus on. And so you don't have that sort of space in which to reflect on where you're heading. So I think that's a big one. One small one, just in relation to, it's not a small one, but I think one specific issue that is very important is avoiding flaring. Now, that is something that has been a huge challenge across our group because you want to get to production quickly because you want the oil to come out to have the revenues. But if you rush that, you don't have the infrastructure in place to capture the gas. You don't have a policy to determine what you're going to do with the gas. You don't have institutions that are strong enough to sort of twist the arm of the operator and say, no, you can't flare, and you can't just pay a fine to continue flaring. And it's a very difficult issue for an emerging producer, even for an established producer to remedy. But I think it's really an important one, because if you get flaring right, and in the sense, if you avoid the flaring of associated gas while you're producing oil, that's really a sign that you've got a lot of things in place in your checkerboard. And it would be sort of a reassuring sign of the state of the industry, I would say, something important to focus on.
Thank you for that contribution. I'd like to give the floor over to Mr. Sanzillo. I know that you would have heard a lot of perspectives thus far. And given the really insightful report that was put forward by the institute that you're part of, we seem to be on an aggressive pathway to the development of our oil. Would you say that Guyana runs the risk of being on a dangerous precipice if we don't stop and try to fix some of the provisions in the contract that I know that you would have spoken on quite a few times? Do you think that we're placing ourselves in a dangerous position?
Yeah, I think that I think what Valerie just said, there's a lot to agree with, but the government has elected to move forward probably too quickly, and is not in a position to handle it, and the contract is evidence of that. It's a contract that is fatally flawed in numerous areas. But the thing that being in the position that I'm in, and you can go off into 1,000 different directions, and there are issues for sure. But the one thing that the purpose of this exercise is to get Guyana money. And if you don't focus on that, what's the point? And right now, the contract is poorly written. It doesn't appear that there's audit capacity to deal with it. And so you're not really in a position to know whether or not the country is getting the dollars that it's supposed to get. And then the other issues that Mr. Patterson raised about the Sovereign Wealth Fund and all they're all vitally important. But first you have to have the money, and you have to have the money that you're entitled to before you can start the discussion of spending it. And right now, the country's not in a position to enforce the poor contract that they have.
Okay. Ms. Janke, thank you very much, sir, for your contribution, first of all. Ms. Janke, do you have any perspectives that you'd like to offer before we close this first round of our discussion?
Yes, please. I'd like to do a sort of a reality check. There is no excuse for this contract. It is abusive and exploitative. And if you talk to people, you will hear that the people of Guyana have had enough of an abusive, exploitative oil deal with ExxonMobil and its partners. In terms of the money, I agree with Tom completely. If the purpose of this is to get in money, and we've heard promises of vast wealth, the promises of vast wealth are in fact lies, and Guyana is going to end up with massive debt, already has massive debts that it has to pay, including $460 million of pre-contract costs, for which there appears to be no legal basis. And I want to just conclude this by, well, not conclude, but when we talk about the Sovereign Wealth Trust Fund, that fund is not lawful. David Granger signed as the president of Guyana when he was not president of Guyana. He ceased to be president of Guyana under the Constitution in December 2018, and therefore could not sign any law in January when he purported to do so. So the Sovereign Wealth Trust Fund does not have a legal basis in Guyana's laws, and people need to ask, where is that money going and who is responsible for it? In terms of the flaring is already illegal under the laws of Guyana. It is unlawful for ExxonMobil to be using the faulty equipment that they did. There are provisions already which say that the associated natural gas must be used in production or it must be re-injected. If it has no commercial value, then it has to be disposed of. Clearly, it has no commercial value because otherwise Exxon would be selling it. So the legal structure is there, but it is being ignored. The EPA is not doing its job of enforcing the Environmental Protection Act, and the government is not doing its job of protecting the people and following the laws that are there. We have strong laws.
Thank you very much for that contribution there, Ms. Janki. I'd like to turn to the issue of.
Kiana, just allow me one
Sure,
second. So,
sure.
I thank you very much. I fully agree with Melinda and Valerie when it comes to the question of flaring. Obviously that is a vexing issue, and I did and we have acknowledged it audit in the FDP for Lisa 1 and 2. The question of flaring is not adequately addressed, but I do think that EPA prior to September were making steps to correct that. On the matter of the gas having no commercial value, I would disagree with that. And on the question of what is legal in the sovereign wealth fund or not, once again, that's what the courts are there to determine. I do think that there is a case. So therefore, and if the Sovereign Wealth Fund Act that was signed in January of 2019, if that's legal or not, obviously the courts can decide that. But from my perspective, it's from my knowledge, the funds are going into from the information that we have, that we up to August, whatever funds we have garnered are going into that fund. But if someone wants to challenge the legality of it, they should, but we can't just simply throw away the baby in the bathwater and say that it is not legal, don't, without any legal justification, and don't actually enact or try to seek to enact what is there right now. Just wanted those comments on the record.
Thank you. On the issue of gas, I know Mr. Patterson, during your time prior to 2020, you would have served as the Minister of Public Infrastructure, where you would have engaged in discussions with ExxonMobil on matters related to bringing gas to shore before 2024. Can you say a little bit about what some of those discussions entailed? That's one. And two, where do you see Guyana's future with oil and gas? Not just oil and gas, but particularly gas, especially since there are a lot of safeguards which are not in place as yet. Do you think it's proper for us to move so aggressively towards this end when the right legal and regulatory safeguards are still absent?
Thank you very much. Speaking about gas procurement, and that is a sector which was under my direct control up to 2018, before the establishment of the Department of Energy. First, let's say this: we have to always put gas and power in the context of where Guyana is at the moment. At the moment, we produce 100% of our electricity from hydrocarbons, heavy fuel oil, which is a major pollutant, the burning of these in production of these. Currently, we as a country, we still do have marginally thin reserves, electricity reserves. So obviously, and we have a very fragile infrastructure. So the idea of bringing gas to shore for the sole purpose of generating electricity was one which I myself personally championed as an economic venture. It is cheaper. It would be very much cheaper. As in environmental, it is it's not renewable, but it's clean. It's considered clean energy. And secondly, that this gas to shore project would have been the very first big project from the oil and gas discovery, which would have had direct impact on the lives of all Guyanese. Therefore, as you're aware, Kiana, I spent a tremendously long time doing several studies, engaging several international institutions, the World Bank, IDB, the government of Japan. We independently commissioned several studies to ensure that that at least this very first project, if ever executed, would be successful. Of course, with the establishment of the Department of Energy, all the work was handed over to that agency in August 1, 2018. But at the time of August 2018, We had furthered several studies. The only outstanding issue was the question of a location. We had approached the World Bank as well as the Japanese government to lend us experts, maybe just like Thomas, on the question of the pricing, the cost. I mean, we had advanced with Exxon Mobil, the government's position, my position at the time, that we should only be repaying them for the transportation of the gas, which is the pipeline, not the gas itself. I mean, that was, and at the time, while that discussion was going on in 2018, 2018, Exxon was under tremendous pressure internationally from persons such as newspapers as yourself, as well as Melinda, her group, on the equity of the contract. So they were very amenable in 2018 at that particular time to consider our proposal, which is the question of the only cost for the gas that can be recovered was for the cost of the pipeline coming to shore. And we also, but knowing that we had a capacity deficit in the sense of the financial, and we were at a disadvantage, we asked the World Bank to present the team and the Japanese government. And I do think those teams were actually hired, but they went to the Department of Energy. Unfortunately, I am unaware at the extent, I'm unaware of what transpired from 2018 to now. But I knew at the time that ceased being with us, we were very close to an arrangement to have the gas come to shore. And we were talking about the cost. Well, of course, the cost per cubic meter that the government was going to pay was just obviously the transportation cost to recoup the cost of constructing the pipeline. We had several various theories and recommendations: who should own the pipeline, who should build the pipeline, and those things like that. And that was being considered. We also had several advice. I mean, Tom will tell you on the question of, obviously, at the time, in 2018, it was 30 million cubic feet per day. Obviously, Guyana would not be able to utilize that immediately as soon as we land the pipeline. So therefore, the recommendation of deferred allocation, deferred, because of the take or pay issue. I mean, obviously, they would like to recoup the money for the pipeline as soon as possible. But experts were already there advising us on the process in which we can continue and how we can progressively build out in the electricity sector. So our idea was actually to have a discussion. We also had a recommendation on procurement. It was recommended that we go to for the actual generations and those things, that we go to public procurement as opposed to entering into sole sourcing with any one engine manufacturer and those things like that. So at July 31st, 2018, the government's concern would have been the infrastructure to distribute the electricity, which is on the GPL, and we would follow the advice of the experts in landing into site and then converting the natural gas into electricity. So, but we do think it's a viable project. Obviously, that for electricity purposes, Guyana's electricity needs have been growing 7% per annum since 2015. As I said, as everyone can know, frequently we have a lot of power outages purely because of the poor state of our grid, as well as the lack of generating capacity in the country. So we will be supporting any project that brings power to shore for the purpose of generating electricity. And finally, Kiana, I want to say that unlike other persons, I never viewed this as a single standalone project. I viewed it as one of many in whichever form that we would do. But obviously, so we need to maximize the amount of gas we're getting, the associated gases we are getting from these fields. So we viewed it as one project, primarily to ensure that we can benefit the country and move our trajectory from just where we are at, provide cheap electricity to boost and to kickstart some sort of industrialized growth, and obviously to the benefit of all.
That was quite a comprehensive comment there, Mr. Patterson. But what I really was trying to get from you is if you believe that it is still critical for us to move ahead with such a project when many of the regulatory and legislative frameworks that we should have in place are still absent. But before I hand the floor back to you, I'd like to get some input from the other members of the panel. Mr. Sanzillo, I'd like to hear your comments in this regard.
Well, on the gas situation, it'd be just a couple of quick ones. I mean,
Sure.
I recognize the desire to use the resource in the way it was described, but it's based on kind of a view of oil and gas markets that maybe existed 10 years ago. Right now, the world has an oversupply of gas, and there's no real need for it in the world market system, and that's largely because the price of renewable, well, largely because of oversupply, but also in many places that we're in 30 countries around the world, and we don't know of any place in the world where an aggressive renewable energy plan would be more expensive than even the gas infrastructure costs that Mr. Patterson was speaking to. And the other one, I have to be frank. I'll be frank about this. The way that the contracts were negotiated for this oil endeavor gives me no confidence that the country has an ability to negotiate a pipeline and power plants and other infrastructure on a price that would actually be affordable. I have no evidence of that. We have no evidence of that. We have evidence to the contrary. And I'm not sure, but I didn't hear whether or not there was a comparable analysis of whether or not there was a cost comparison between, where the renewable markets are and where the and how the arrangement would be in Guyana, the proposed arrangement. So I would say that you have a real a viable alternative that doesn't bring with you the whole host of issues that you've raised and which Guyana is unprepared to deal with.
Thank you very much. I'd like to turn to Ms. Janke. You've been very interested in this particular area where gas is concerned and striving to ensure that some of the pitfalls of this particular area are known and to call upon our leaders to put measures in place to safeguard the country. What are your thoughts on Guyana's aggressive move to bring gas to shore?
I think the idea of using the gas to bring it to shore is completely economically and environmentally irresponsible. I've got two things to say. One is that this is going to result in massive debt. And secondly, that at the moment, this is illegal. So under Section 17 of the Environmental Protection Act, any policy decision that might have an impact, a significant impact on the environment, has to have an environmental impact assessment. That was not done. So before there is any move to do this gas, there needs to be an environmental impact assessment, and the decision to do the gas should be quashed. We shouldn't even be paying attention to that. There must be an environmental impact assessment first. Secondly, environmentally, gas is not clean energy. I don't know who put this myth out, but with gas, you get methane leaks, which are 80 times more dangerous than carbon dioxide, which is the major greenhouse gas. So you're contributing to climate change in a country that is particularly vulnerable to climate change. In terms of the money, I'll just come back to the legality. We have already said that Guyana will go to 100% renewable energy by 2025. That's a policy decision. There is also a submission that Guyana has made in its intended nationally determined contribution under the Paris Agreement, which is a legally binding treaty, where Guyana has said we will go to 100% renewable energy by 2025, provided that we get the financing. Now we hear there is no financing for renewable energy. but there is financing for what is essentially a lunatic gas project. $400 million for a pipeline that is very dangerous, but no money for the Sorry, can you hear me? I've lost connection.
Yes, I can hear you now. Are the honor members of the panel hearing as well?
Yes.
Okay, Ms.
I
Janke,
think
you
we
can go
lost her.
ahead.
No, I think we lost her.
Yeah, I think we lost. Yeah.
All right.
So Kiana,
Yes.
One second, Mr. Patterson. I think, Ms. Janke, can you hear us? Okay, I think that she's gonna go back offline and return with us. But in the meantime, Mr. Patterson, I do hope that you're making your comments, because I will afford you another opportunity to answer the first question that was asked about this and to respond to some of the comments you've heard this far. In the meantime, I'd like to ask Dr. Marcel to provide us with your insight, the global perspective that you would have been able to have on some of these projects, and what lessons Guyana should pay attention to as it moves towards developing this resource.
Thanks, Kiana. On the gas issue, I mean, I think it's clear that at the time, I don't think Guyana was expecting that there would be as much associated gas in these projects as there is, and so it's actually a substantial resource. So there's a lot of gas, and it can't all be re-injected. And now the pressure that international oil companies are under, big and small, from investors, really pushes them to avoid flaring and methane leakage. And environmental damage, of course. They're under huge pressure to show that their production is not associated with flaring and methane leakage. So there's a big now new incentive for a company like Exxon, which is maybe not succumbing to that pressure as much as the European oil companies. Exxon is the one that sort of I think has a bit of the head in the sand with regards to some of the growing environmental, voluntary principles that companies are following now. But still, I think there's a real common interest in doing something productive with the gas. The question is the affordability. Once it gets to shore, it's putting in place, having this sort of sequence like a domino to get everything in place in the right amount of time to minimize costs, so you can bring it to shore. But I don't think that it should be the be all end all for Guyana, because of course the hinterland will not be connected to power like a power grid, and so renewables are really important for addressing the power needs of a huge part of the Guyanese territory. So it's not the full solution, but I think there is value in the project. I say that without having been reading any of the feasibility studies or the economics of it. Just at a principle level, I think it can make sense. I wanted to just react very quickly to something that the methane leaks that were mentioned before. Gas production is not associated with methane leaks necessarily. Oil production can also create methane leaks. It is a mistake of a poor production to have methane leaks, and it can be very easily addressed. And it's a very easy issue to resolve for a government to watch carefully. And the company would want to avoid that now as well. Before the end of the show, I hope I can come back to the contract issue.
Absolutely.
If you allow me, Kiana. Should I say something now or wait till later?
You can go ahead.
Okay, I know there's so much talk about renegotiating the contract, and I understand how frustrating it is for Guyana to be in an unfavorable contract. I wanted to just raise the contrary view to some of the points made in the program, which is that, I think renegotiating an existing contract isn't the sort of the panacea that it could be presented. Now the oil market has changed so much. Oil companies are under tremendous pressure right now from investors. The idea that to renege on an agreement is not necessarily the right time to do that. There are many opportunities for bringing a company to the table to force to bring them to make some concessions that are much more beneficial to the country. Every time they ask for an extension, every time they want to avoid a penalty, every time they come back asking for something, the companies are always coming back to governments asking for something. And each one of those opportunities is a moment to negotiate something and to trade for something you want. So I don't think it's that important. And I want to emphasize that I think the project design is much more, that's where the big value is. I mean, we're always focused on the contract terms and how much money you get from a contract, but really it's the way you design a project, how the Payara field development plan was reviewed. Did the government have all the tools and the time and the capacity to be able to ensure that field was developed in the best interest of the Guyanese state? That's where the big value is. It's not the sexy part of the discussion, but it's where the big value is. So I just wanted to put that out there. I think it's really important.
Yes, and I do agree with you. In fact, that's one of the next topics that we will be turning to, field development costs. But before we, not just the field development costs, but the field development plans and the effective review of those plans. Now, before we get to that aspect of our discussion, for those who are now joining us, Ms. Janki just had a bit of a technical issue earlier, and so she has rejoined the discussion. I would just like to offer her the opportunity to finish her remarks on the issue of bringing gas to shore, and then we will allow Mr. Patterson the opportunity as well to respond to some of the comments made and to also answer the question that was asked.
Thank you very much. So I'm sorry about that. What I had said was that I think the gas to shore project is a lunatic project, really, for two reasons. One, the illegalities associated with this project, including the failure to carry out an environmental impact assessment, and the fact that we have an international obligation which says that we will go to 100% renewable energy by 2025, provided that we have the money. We cannot now turn around and spend that money on natural gas. Environmentally, this is a gas is a disaster. It is not cleaner energy. The comparison is between the current supply of energy, which is a heavy fuel oil, which is a terrible supply, and renewable energy. Where is the economic analysis that shows that natural gas is better for Guyana than renewable energy? There has been a complaint to the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination because the gas project will come to the coast, and it appears that it will only supply people along the coast unless Guyana is going to invest in massively expensive infrastructure. But the debt, the money to pay for this, burdens the entire country and therefore puts a disproportionate detriment on the Amerindian people of Guyana. What steps are being taken to protect them from what is really an economically foolish proposition? The associated gas under the contract is supposed to be supplied free of charge, although there are massive expenses on getting it to the coast and then putting it into the infrastructure. For the non-associated gas, there is a formula. Obviously, before you do a gas project, you must know what is the source of your gas, what is the cost. I've asked Minister Barrett, what gas are you using or proposing to use? He doesn't know. After 2 months, he comes back to me and says, your questions are technical in nature and we will endeavor to answer them at a later stage. How can you possibly decide to do a gas project and you don't know what gas you're going to use. So it seems to me that we're being driven to use the gas because it's being flared by ESSO, not because there is a reason, not because Guyana needs the gas, because we don't. We're going to go 100% renewable by 2025. We're not going to be using this gas. What we have is this idea to use it because ESSO is flaring, and the World Bank wants to dismantle Guyana's laws, which already make that flaring illegal, and allow ESSO to flare until 2030 under their so-called zero flaring initiative, which is not a zero flaring initiative, but a let's flare until 2030 initiative. The Guyanese people need to be very, very careful when they hear that the World Bank is involved in anything. The gas project in Ghana, the Sankofa project, has burdened the Ghanaian people with gas that they don't want and that they have to pay for every year. So in my view, the gas to shore project is a non-starter economically and environmentally. I would defer to Tom Senzillo on the questions of the cost of gas, the cost of the pipelines, and the future of the gas sector, and I completely agree with the points that he made. This is not cheap electricity. I have never heard of cheap electricity where just the pipeline is going to cost you $400 million US, according to the figures put out by the previous government and the current government.
Thank you very much, Ms. Janke. Mr. Patterson, I'll turn the floor over to you to respond to the comments that you would have heard.
Right. I want to make this as quick as possible.
Yes.
From my knowledge, Melinda, it was associated gas, but obviously the new administration may have different ideas of what associated gas and non-associated gas is. I thank Valerie for her comments. I think Melinda missed them on the question of clean energy and pollutants and those things like that, and I endorse that. On the question of renewable energies and the question of the powering, Guyana is quite a large country. For your views, it's about the same size as Great Britain. And Valerie and Melinda and Tom, you're all absolutely correct. A gas to shore project will only benefit the interconnected grid, which is about half of our regions. Currently, right now, in the 2020 budget, I know that for sure because I particularly signed it, there are 4 hydro projects to address hinterland communities, 4 solar farms to address these areas. The idea was always the larger population centers, the towns that you have Letem, Madia, Mabaruma, Bartica, they're going to be powered by renewable energies, and the transition to a renewables green state will have started from the in the hinterland regions and coming towards the coast, because obviously the energy requirement for those areas, for those communities are far less. So there is an existing hydropower going on in the village of Kaieteur. So the large population centers outside of Georgetown where will be, I reckon, sometime before 2022, 2023, powered by hydro or renewable energies. The question of the transition, Thomas and Melinda, from us going to renewable energies, that there is a study. It's available, and Melinda, if you haven't seen it, I'm willing to send it to you. It is online. And it does address the question of how we can transition from right now brown fuel to clean fuel. I know you disagree what's clean fuel, as well as go to 100% renewables. The major issue, I would say, Melinda, is that you have to know that the hydro and the renewable energy capacities of our country lie in the hinterland, in the region 8 and region 9. The hydro, they are in region 9, in those areas. That's where our hydro potential. It is tremendously costly. You're talking about $400 million for pipe. It is tremendously costly to to set up a medium scale hydropower and then get the power to our centers in Guyana. The Myla Falls project, which was started, that's $1.2 billion over an 8-year period if we have to start today. So So, I mean, and obviously, and in the interim between starting and having power brought to shore, hydropower brought to the urban centers, we still have to cater for the needs of the Guyanese future. The studies which you can look at, Melinda, show that 40% of any cost that we would do will go into transmission and distribution. On the question of Thomas, on the question of Guyana having the capacity to negotiate an economic contract, and I absolutely agree with you. And we were not at the stage of us entering an economic contract. We had asked for help, support in doing that, but I was very convinced that as a transitional period, that it would be, long as the contracts and the regulations were in place, it would be beneficial to the country. Otherwise, there is a study once again, which is available online as well. I'm surprised it's not seen, which shows it gives us the various alternatives in comparison. If we continue with using HFO and LFO to fund and to work on our engineers, how much it would cost us vis-a-vis trying to use the natural gas. So we were not at a position of negotiating the economic thing. What we were doing is trying to see if it's technically feasible, which it was, which it is, and how we can do this. And then obviously we are seeking help to get it done. Yeah. So right now, as you know, there is about currently about almost 60 megawatts of renewable energy, which will be in place by 2025. That's the date that we give Melinda. The date His Excellency gave, 2025, was extremely ambitious. But obviously, he is the president, and I obviously didn't question it, but he did have a caveat, funding available. And unfortunately, the funding is not available to transition to 100% renewable energy by 2025. The energy mix transition that we have carries us up to 2037. Right, and we're saying by then we should be able to move as a country further and closer to the goals of going 100% renewable. So those are my comments, and the regulations. We mean obviously we at the time we were looking at several different upgrades. I mean, I do hope that I was still on. I mean, including the regulations of administering the gas project. The EIAs, I mean, I know that was raised with the EPA before August, before the new administration for the gas to power. The question of grid stability, the question of opt-in powers, opt-in tariffs, and those things like that. All of those were being done and were in some level of almost completed. But once again, I mean, you'd have to ask the new administration what's the current direction that they will be carrying the industry and the sector.
You know, what you've really spelled out here is a recipe for financial bankruptcy for Guyana. What you're doing here is, if you take a look at it from a point of view of how you handle money and debt, is you're simply taking what might be any amount of surplus that you're getting from oil, which is going to be minuscule in my view and quite different from what you think, and you're going to put it into an expensive natural gas project, and you're going to be one way or another just transferring the money. And let me go back to the prize that I think I understand and we don't disagree with, is that you're trying to close your deficit, you're trying to build your sovereign wealth fund, and you're trying to spend on some new areas, which I hope is not exclusively energy. I don't think I've seen in any of your planning documents. But what you just did was you just took all of your profit and put it into a natural gas scheme, or whatever it is, just on the debt level. So you've really created a situation where you're not only not making enough money on your oil because you're willing to accept this contract that is highly lopsided, but you're then going to take whatever resources you get and give it back to the fossil fuel interests and not be able to take care of your country. I mean, yeah, I see. This is a debt. This is made up. This is a deal made up by fossil fuel interests and bankers, and it's not in your best interest. I have a lot of respect for the trouble that you're facing and the issues that you're facing, and the fiscal. But you got the fiscal aspect of this backwards.
Dr.
Right. So
Marcel.
Thomas, thank you very much for that. But once and I think that what has been lacking in the country, in Guyana, in this entire discussion, is a really holistic debate on the alternatives. So you have put forward your opinion, and I have no doubt you are the expert on it. I mean, I'm expert in nothing. However, let's hear what I think you just said, like, what are the alternatives available for us to? I'm speaking now here as the former energy minister. What are the alternatives available to meeting the needs and the demands of the country?
So, Mr. Patterson, thank you very much for your comment, and I'd also like to thank Mr. Sanzillo. I'm also interested in hearing if there are any responses from Dr. Marcel or Ms. Janke before we conclude the aspect of discussion on gas to shore.
In all completeness, Thomas has made some very profound statement, which I absolutely have zero qualms, which, and I do think that he is absolutely valid. He is the expert in it. However, so we also should use the opportunity of him being here to also ask us, explore what are the alternatives, the alternative routes that he would prefer, not in depth, but just generally say that he would recommend that you go and borrow the money. He would recommend that we do energy policies to conserve energy. I don't know. So you should just leave statements like those in an oil and gas discussion, just open-ended, I would hope.
No, Mr. Patterson, that is not what we're doing. But before we get into that, I would like to allow the women on the panel to also express their thoughts on some of the things that they've heard, and to say whether they would like to make an input before we move on to another aspect of this discussion.
Yeah, I'd be keen to take this up a little. Just to raise the point that access to energy is a critical instrument of raising prosperity and economic growth, and it is important to have access to energy. It's important for the hinterland, and it's important for the urbanized areas. So I think it's pretty clear, as Mr. Patterson said, that we're not going to get 100% renewables by 2025. That's a pipe dream, if I can use that word. That doesn't mean that renewables shouldn't aggressively be pursued, because that is the end game. But in the immediate term, we have heavy fuel being burned for power, and we don't have renewables. So I think that if the gas project is designed carefully, and it is clear that the gas will be affordable, that's one thing. The problem in Ghana, which Melinda raised, was that it was the Sankofa field, the gas price wasn't actually affordable. So the project would never make sense. It would always have to be subsidized, and that would always create a spiral of debt for government or non-payment for the gas. And so that's a real issue. I think it's looking at what you look at the merits of the project. Do the economics make sense? Yes or no? How much are you willing to pay for it? What gains do you get in terms of raising prosperity and economic growth in the country? And I think, I think I can see potential merits to it without having seen the fine print.
Thank you, Dr. Marcel. Ms. Janke?
Yes, I'm always interested when people say, do the economics work? Because Joseph Stiglitz and Nick Stern, who are two former World Bank economists, have both said fossil fuels are out, natural gas is a no-no. The best thing that countries can do now for a post-COVID-19 recovery is to invest in renewable energy, because dollar for dollar, you get more prosperity, you get cheaper energy, and your country is back on track in a more economically viable way. So by all means, let's see the economic analysis. And David, please do send me your reports. I have a feeling that you're going to need to update that market analysis to take into account what has happened since then, the fact that renewables are cheaper and that renewable energy companies are actually making more money now and are a better bet than fossil fuel companies. And Tom, you know much more about this than I do, so please correct me if I'm wrong on this. Secondly, in terms of the World Bank's involvement in Guyana, of course, it was a disaster. Every World Bank project on oil and gas is a disaster for the people in the country. We wrote to the World Bank and we asked them to show how this proposed gas project would meet the requirements of economy and efficiency, which is what the World Bank is required to do under its own articles, which are an international treaty. And they couldn't do it. They wrote back and they said, ask the government. They cannot show how using natural gas meets the requirements of economy and efficiency. Now, the World Bank can't show that. This gas project is a non-starter. And we can kid ourselves by comparing it to white elephants like Amelia Falls, that it's somehow better because it's not going to be a disaster like Amelia Falls. That's not the issue. What we need to see is a robust analysis that looks at the market as it is right now, that takes into account the technological advances that have been made and serves the needs of the people of this country, not the requirements of the oil and gas sector, who need somewhere to put the associated natural gas because they didn't put in the right equipment to re-inject it in the first place, and burden this country with yet more debt, leading to financial bankruptcy, fiscal bankruptcy. So what we need to see is something far more robust than promises of a rosy future. We need to deal with the reality.
Thank you for that contribution, Ms. Janke. I'm now going to attempt once more to just wrap up this session on discussing gas. And Mr. Patterson, before we had turned the floor over to the women on the panel, you had put forward a question for consideration by Mr. Sanzillo regarding the alternatives that Guyana should consider in light of his view of it being leading us to financial bankruptcy. So, Mr. Sanzillo, I'd like to turn the floor over to you for your response and concluding remarks, and we shall go to a quick commercial break.
You want a response now, or are you going to go to a break?
Yes, I'll take your response now, and then we'll go to a quick commercial break.
This is not a quick response. It's not a quick response, and
Go ahead. You have
and
the
there
floor.
are certain things that probably shouldn't be discussed publicly right now. But I will generally lay out some of the things.
Sure.
Your fiscal situation, you're heading into a whole new time for the country in terms of its economic and fiscal history, and you're approaching it with fiscal practices of a mom and pop store, if you will, and you need a lot more sophistication there. And that's usually done, not that complicated actually. Many countries adopt 5-year financial plans that allow them to say to themselves and to the public, this is our objectives financially on the big picture items and how we might be handling them. You would like to know, for instance, what you really are going to get from Exxon and from your oil profits for the next 5 years or so annually, so that you have some kind of way of working around your budgetary scheme, and that you can then plan your debt accordingly, plan your expenditures accordingly, make sure that your hospitals and other needs are met, and not plan these things higgledy off, one going in one direction and one going in another. So that's a financial way of looking at it. The second thing is most places that are getting involved in the kind of revolution you're looking at in the change in your energy system would look to something that more akin to an integrated resource plan that would be somehow linked to your financial structure, and that would take a little bit of time. You're probably a little closer there, but you're still planning projects one at a time rather than as an integrated whole. And I think those are, and then there's a process of getting a better positioning on your oil contract, which I don't want to talk about publicly, but which is possible to do. And I think the country of Guyana has tremendous leverage, and it's not using it. And I look to Valerie made a point before. She said, "Well, every time the company comes back, you can leverage them." No, you leverage nothing from Kaieteur. You leverage nothing. You just gave it up. So there are ways to do this. And you could handle it a lot better, but you can't conduct audits like I read in the newspaper yesterday. You can't have a half done audit. You have to enforce these things, and you have to enforce these things from the beginning. When you let it go once, it's gone. You're over. And Exxon is in a tough financial situation right now, and they're looking to take you for every nickel they can. And if you don't adopt that position and fight back, you're going to get suckered, and you're going to lose, and the country is going to lose miserably in this process. This is a tough time in the oil and gas business. It's not a time for niceties.
Thank you very much for your contribution, Mr. Sanzillo, and to the rest of the panel. We will go to a quick commercial break, and when we return, we'll be looking at field development costs and how Guyana might be able to put systems in place to avoid the corruption pitfalls of this sector.
Study internationally certified oil and gas course at Nations. They offer NBA Oil and Gas Management, ABIOSH, FPSO and Oil Rig Safety Manager, NEBOSH International Certificate in Oil and Gas Operation, and LNMM International Oil and Gas Law. Check out their website for more information at nations.gy or email info@nations.gy.
Kaieteur Radio, keeping you informed.
Demerara and Essequibo 99.1 FM.
Burbies 99.5 FM. Kaieteur Radio.
Hello there, Guyana. You've asked for it. It is finally here. The Wake Up Guyana Show with yours truly, Leonard Gildari. Monday to Friday, 1 p.m. to 3 p.m. Make your voices be heard. Call us, text us. Kaieteur Radio 99.1, 99.5 FM. The Wake Up Guyana Show.
Digicel Prime Bundles just got better with 3 new apps. Watch more with PlayGo. Share more with Sportsmax. Read more news with Loop. Listen more with D-Music. Plus extra data. It's simply more bundled together. 51 gigabytes for 7 days for only $2,000. Live the experience with Digicel. Activate today on the My Digicel app.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. If you're now joining us, this is a special edition of Guyana's Oil and You. It's our end of year program, and I am your hostess, senior journalist of Kaieteur News, Kiana Wilburg. We have a very diverse panel for today's discussion, and they include international lawyer Miss Melinda Janke, Chatham House Associate Fellow Dr. Valerie Marcel, former Minister and Head of the Parliamentary Public Accounts Committee, Mr. David Patterson, and Mr. Tom Sanzillo, the Director of Financial Analysis at the Institute for Energy Economics and Financial Analysis. So, members of the panel, we just returned from a commercial break, and there are two areas that are very important to the oil and gas discussion that we have here in Guyana, and one of that has to do with field development costs. We are seeing millions, in fact, billions of dollars being piled onto the table for us to audit. We have pre-contract costs, $460 million US dollars. We have a little bit more after 2015, from 2015 to 2017, and that is also in millions of US dollars. We also have the cost associated with Liza Phase 1, Liza Phase 2, and Payara, and that is way over 10 billion US dollars. We are still stuck at auditing the pre-2015 costs, but we're still allowing this aggressive development of activities, of projects. Mr. Sanzillo, I'd like to start with you. With this picture, do you think Guyana is on a dangerous cliff?
Yes, I think what you have here is although you'd like to live with the and say, oh, we have this lopsided contract and it's okay because we can just do this and this. This is an ongoing thing. This is a process by which Exxon and the companies will have developed a strategy by which every decision and every submission to Guyana is an us versus them kind of process, and without the skill and hard-nosed negotiating capability, each one of those transactions is going to be a win or a lose. It's unfortunate that that's the way, but the industry is in such a bind right now that it has to pursue itself in an almost ruthless manner. And so you'll see a lot of that. I wasn't quite clear on what that audit was in the newspaper, except that it disturbed me a little bit. I'm not quite sure if there's a $460 million, I don't know, I don't want to lose your listeners, but there's a $460 million amount that's already in the contract. And I didn't know whether they were adding another 1.2 billion, or this was actually part of another part of the contract, which is called total development costs, which is another part of the contract. I couldn't quite tell, and I would need to read the audit. But the point is that maybe the broader point is that the contract is written in such a way that there are many ways that ExxonMobil can come in and make claims against Guyana by putting costs into the contract that maybe were not anticipated before, but that they, because of the poor nature in which the contract was crafted, will be able to take advantage of as their attorneys and accountants, who are much bigger and more experienced in these kinds of things than the Guyana government is. They will take advantage of each of those little areas. When I reviewed the contract, that's kind of, I was looking at it from that angle, saying, well, how would I strategically do this if I was Exxon to a small country that really didn't have a lot of resources to combat this? And there's just one after another opportunity to exploit the position, and then that gets put into a somewhat complicated formula, but it's not that complicated if you want to sit down and go through it. And it allows them to keep piling on costs, and every time you pile on costs, Guyana gets its money later and later. if you will. So you have to pay them before you get a handsome amount of profit that you've been promised. You'll get some, and as you did this year, you got some. But as the costs mount up, it slows the rate of revenue that would come into Guyana. And so that's what you're faced with. You're going to be faced with this nickel and diming stuff that ExxonMobil is going to be doing time and time and time again, every day, all the time. And it looks to me like the first audit got botched. And don't think ExxonMobil isn't watching that. They're looking for every one of your weaknesses, and they will exploit it.
Thank you, Mr. Sanzillo. Dr. Marcel, this is something that you would have raised during the earlier discussion on gas, and you would have pointed out that the review of field development plans is really an area that Guyana really needs to ask some important questions, one of which includes, do we have the capacity to effectively review these plans and to ensure that there are cost savings, which is something that you alluded to. Considering these points that you would have made and other perspectives that you may have on this matter, do you think the time has come for us to really press the pause button on the rate at which we're approving contracts and to say, well, listen, you know what, let's focus on developing capacity? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a tough one because there's a limited time frame now for the oil sector. So we don't know how much time each country will have. It depends on the cost of its resources. It depends on the market and how long the market continues to want the oil. But we know there's a limited time frame. So that pushes a lot of governments to rush to get the oil out so that they can monetize it before there's no longer a market. So there's that understandable kind of incentive. And add to that the fact that Guyana's partner, Exxon, is also pushing very hard for rapid monetization. It also wants the oil out of the ground as soon as possible. When you do that, the risk is that you're no longer focusing on capturing the maximum value from the resources that are underground. So you're not thinking about ultimate recovery from the field, that is to try and get as much of the oil and gas out as you can. You're not focusing as much on, I think, as Thomas was pointing out, the importance of an integrated energy planning and development plan. Like you don't have your map laid out so that you can fit this piece, that one field, Payara, Liza 2, or whatever field, into that map and optimize costs so that you're sharing infrastructure across fields. You haven't maybe anticipated all the ways in which there can be cost reductions because companies would be working together across fields or sharing drilling results across fields. There's so many sort of architectural kind of issues that you don't have time to design and think about if you're rushing through. And so I think the fast pace is perhaps too fast for Guyana. It would be too fast for most countries, to be honest. I think on balance, it's better to get it right and slow it down, without going perhaps as far as a country like Uganda did, which has slowed things down so much that now it may not be able to produce its reserves because the cost of those reserves are not as attractive as the market would want right now. So anyway, it's finding the balance, but I think it's extremely important to have that sort of architectural or policy planning view of the whole thing to really be able to ensure that there's long-term value for Guyana.
Valerie, what did you mean by that there is a limited time, that there is a limit to the market? What did you mean by this? Is a 40-year agreement, right?
Oh no, I mean that now that we've probably hit the peak global demand for oil, the demand for oil is it has stopped growing and will decline. The producers that are the most expensive ones or have the most difficult projects, the ones that can't prevent flaring, are going to be the first ones to drop off. They won't be able to produce the oil that they have underground as time goes by. So the last man standing will be Saudi Arabia, most likely. But between Saudi Arabia and the most expensive producer, and the most high risk one would be the Arctic right now, perhaps. So between Saudi Arabia and the Arctic, in which order do the producers drop off over the next 20, 30, 40 years? Who knows how long it'll be exactly, but there will be a decline.
That's when Guyana is supposed to be making its money on the back end of the contract, right?
Well, I mean, I think the payback phase is probably going to be something like 4 years for Lisa, isn't it? So I think it'll start to, the curves will start to be in Guyana's
No, the
favor.
payback for Guyana, not for the oil asset, and the contractual arrangement for Guyana being receiving its payback, not the energy transaction. The fiscal transaction for Guyana is backloaded. They will only receive robust payments, the kind that you and I would look at as being in the billions annually, only after there is a substantial drop in the amount of the total development costs of the project, which is at least 5 to 10 years from now. So where do you see the oil markets 5 to 10 years from now? And will that then, this is why my report only went for 5 years, because I don't think you can look much beyond it and get a really good picture. But I'm really concerned about that this is backloaded for Guyana and the day will never come. That's why I asked about the limits to the market. I agree with you. On that.
Okay.
I think any producer now negotiating new terms would have to think very carefully about paying the companies first for all the costs and waiting too long to be at their payback, because I think contracts have to now take stock of that energy transition and in order to ensure that the state's interests are defended.
And that's not been done here, just from my point of view. Maybe some of the others would disagree, but from my point of view, that's not been done here. This is backloaded, and that's your problem here. You're not going to see that money. That's my issue, and that's my concern, and that's how I see it, and that's why I'm here.
Thank you. So, Mr. Patterson, what is your take being here on the ground? Do you believe that we are on a dangerous cliff, considering that we're yet to conclude the audit of the pre-contract costs, and we're piling on so much already from the other projects that we're granting? Mr. Patterson, you're still there with us?
Sorry, I was muted. My apologies. Thank you. Yes, so I agree 100% with Thomas and Valerie, who said that PR was a missed opportunity. I think so. I know that was something that we had considered. A little known fact was that, I'm unaware of any policy change in the former administration. A little known fact is that we, when there was the Oil and Gas Cabinet Subcommittee, we had recommended that at the end of the Lisa 1 and Lisa 2's agreement that we should slow our and take a step back. I think this is public knowledge. So PRO, so despite what was going on, we had said, and this was done not only for the question of our lack of capacity, this was also done through the Minister of Finance, his reporting, in the sense that, obviously, look, listen to me, we have to be able to spend this money sustainably. We just can't simply be looking at, exactly what you're saying, Thomas, throwing a lot of money into a sovereign wealth fund if we don't have a full program. And Thomas, unlike what you said, I mean, I'm not an economist or anything like that, but my understanding from how the sovereign wealth fund, legal or illegal, Melinda, I don't want that to go back there, was that the money went into the sovereign wealth fund, and only a sustainable fixed amount could be taken out annually, and it was to address the entire our entire development, not only oil and gas. So the idea of us going and taking all the money in our wealth fund to build a gas pipeline was not any in consideration. I thought you were going to address how we could have been able to done that sustainably and not. And the question of the pre-contract costs and our ability to audit these reports, audit these costs, that I know has been engaging us as well. When there was the oil and gas subcommittee, which I was part of, five ministers, this question arose almost at every meeting. We agreed the GRA had to be strengthened to maximize the value of our oils and gas, and returns to us. So we do agree. We do agree that we have to build our capacity. We haven't seen the FDP for PRL, and we haven't seen the reports done by the two consultants. I mean, there's one was hired by the Department of Energy, and then there's one hired by the lady from Canada. So we haven't seen those. We don't know. I don't know at sitting here what were the driving forces for the government to agree PR as it is. I know from our standpoint, well, the last information I had is that we had several concerns on the environmental front, which I know there was the former head of EPA had said unequivocally he would not even be considering approving PR if the question of flaring was not addressed in the dumping of water, and several and two other issues which I can't recall he had. And we, as a well, last information I have, I mean, I don't know if, once again, I'm unaware of any policy change, but we had set ourselves, listen to me, exactly what it is. Don't overheat our economy, don't burden our already very limited resources to get it. Let us sit down now and have the Lisa 1, the Lisa 2. That has been approved. Exxon cannot say to us that we're holding up back in such a way. And let us take, and we were looking at, I can say for sure, we're looking at least taking another 12 months to sit down and see if we can get capacity and to address some of the issues that everyone here is raising worldwide and those things like that. We acknowledge, and I acknowledged it earlier, that there are several loopholes in the contract for Exxon on several little fronts. We acknowledge that they have been utilizing some of those loopholes on Lisa 1 and Lisa 2. Obviously, the one Melinda is going to go back to is flaring. We recognize that, I mean, of course, when Lisa 1 was approved, they've given a commitment to zero flaring. They've given a commitment 48 hours is all they need to flare for an initially startup. That has not proven correct. So by the time PIRA came around, we recognized that it is not a question of accepting their words, that we have to strengthen certain issues and those things, and deals with the tools, EPA and several, and the approval of the FDP for PIRA were some of the tools with which we were going to look at it. And we weren't talking about, and don't get me wrong, we weren't talking about contract renegotiations or fiscal terms or those things that we were considering the environmental and the other regulatory agencies. But we know, Valerie, that we recognize at the time that the question of contract and fiscal terms and those things like that would have taken a bigger discussion. But so in sum, we understood, and my administration, best to my knowledge, because of course, I mean, the Cabinet Subcommittee on Oil and Gas ceased to exist on the 1st of August 2018. However, I still retained some connection to the oil and gas sector through the energy thing. And I know to the best of my knowledge, the PIRA was not slated for any fast track or any favorable quick consideration.
Thank you. Ms. Janke, your perspective on this topic.
Thank you very much, Kiana. think there's some confusion here. In terms of the flaring, we already have a legal framework under which the Environmental Protection Agency can stop the flaring. So it's important people understand Guyana can stop ESSO from flaring now. It's nothing to do with the Liza 1 permit or the Liza 2 permit or Payara. And there is this confusion. We have strong laws in this country and we need to use them to stop abuse by oil companies. In terms of the field development plan, first of all, obviously it should be published. This should be a public document. The people should see what's being done. ExxonMobil has come to Guyana to make money. That's what oil companies do. And to take any other perspective on this is to be extremely naive. Secondly, ExxonMobil is not investing in Guyana, and to think otherwise is to be extremely naive. They borrow money, and Guyana pays the interest on that. They spend the money, and Guyana pays for that expenditure when Guyana's oil is sold on the market. This is not an investment. This is free oil, and all of the costs are on Guyana. Now, both Valerie and Tom have mentioned this limited window. The IMF has said in a report that countries who are currently exporting oil should diversify away from oil. What is Guyana doing? Coming into a declining market and hoping to be the exception to the rule and to make money from a declining market. ExxonMobil is not making money from a declining market. So I don't know why the Guyana government thinks that Guyana can make money in a declining market with zero experience of oil and gas, as evidenced by the abusive exploitative contract and the failure to enforce Guyana's laws, which protect the Guyanese people. So this does not have a future.
Thank you, Ms. Janke. So we're coming down to crunch time because we have another program that is slated to be aired. But I'd like to close with a very important topic that we've been having here continuously, part of the discussions here at Kaieteur Radio, and that has to do with how does Guyana protect itself from walking the same pathway or the same road that other oil producers have made, where they've made billions of dollars in oil revenue, but it ended up being a victim to corruption. I'll start with Dr. Marcel. You can give me your closing remarks along with the answer to this question. What can Guyana do to ensure that it does not walk the same pathway as countries like we've seen with Angola and we've seen even with Equatorial Guinea?
Well, that's a tough. It's a tough one to avoid. I think when you have the influx of this amount of money, that will inundate the Guyanese economy, the size of the scale of the revenues in relation to the size of Guyana is quite impressive. And so I think there's no magic bullet, but there are some, there's transparency, publishing as much as possible in contracts, procurement, having open bidding procurement practices. So that's like a set of tools that are well known for shedding light on areas where there can be some corrupt practices. But another one that's quite important, I think, is that with a lot of revenues, you start to have a culture of cronyism, sort of giving contracts and jobs and favors to those who support you. And you end up with a sort of an atrophied political system where there's no real debate over policy between two sides. There's just whoever's in power gives the most goodies to their friends. And you're not really debating that big architecture and that sort of, what do you do with this oil and what is it really for? And I think that healthy debate is becoming more and more difficult in our current world, where we live in a bubble and receive the news from the bubble that's going to give us the news we want. And I think it's really, I think that would be something extremely important for Guyana, is to try to foster opportunities for national debate, for education, to trust your scientists and your scholars at the University of Guyana and other places to hear their interpretations of what's going on. I think it would be really valuable. So just that sort of challenge in a space where there can be debate, that you have that accountability because you're checking the information, but you're also, just having constructive dialogue.
Thank you, Dr. Marcel. Mr. Patterson, what are your concluding thoughts on this matter, and how do you believe Guyana can go about ensuring that it protects the oil sector from many of the risks that comes along with corruption?
Well, that is we'll take another session, a full session, if you actually did to address it. But a couple of points I want to make and take the opportunity to make right away. The question of local content, we haven't been able to address that in this conversation. As a country, we have to determine exactly what we want out of our local content laws and policies. If we aiming for skill transfer or industrial growth. And once we have that discussion, we can tailor our laws to achieve these goals. I agree with Valerie. Open, transparent tendering processes for all the contracts it should be undertaken. And then obviously we should have a discussion. The last major discussion that the country had on the way the country should go in the future with the National Development Strategy, and that was about 30 years ago, if my recollection is correct. In my sector alone, I would have had a 10-year plan on infrastructure alone, but I wasn't integrated into the several other facets of our country: education, the health sector, agriculture, and those things like that. So I do think that right now is an opportune time for us to have a debate and a discussion on a developmental strategy. The future where we want to go. Personally, we felt that diversification and heavy investment in the agriculture and the agriculture sector would augur us well as a country. So what we have to do, as I think as a country, is everyone steps off of their high horses. Everyone, for the better of the country, put aside our political and other agendas. We could pick them back up. I didn't say to lose them altogether, and have an open and frank discussion on where the country should be. I reckon 10, 15 years. That would determine exactly how we go ahead from here. And we'd have a unified position to deal with the oil and gas sector. I think once we have a unified position to deal with the oil and gas sector, we can resume our eternal political battle and those things like that. But we know for sure what everyone from all spheres of the country wants and to see done. We can agree on it. Right now, as you know, Kiana, what happens is every 5 years there's an election, and then what happens, all that is done or achieved in the last 5 years are thrown out. So they're obviously now we're almost back to square one. The Sovereign Wealth Fund, if it's legal or not, Melinda, there's no alternative in place if it's illegal. The updating of the EPA laws, that was done in 1996, and it had and oil and gas wasn't envisaged at the time. It's very scan reference to oil and gas. There's the local content, as I mentioned. And then, of course, there's the overall issue of where Guyana wants to be vis-a-vis CARICOM, South America, and those things. That we have the opportunity to maximize that at this particular stage. Just leverage on what we have now or what is known now. And get consensus, not from the oil and gas industry alone, from our neighbors. So I think now that what is really needed is an open, frank, apolitical talk, discussion with all stakeholders. It can be done long days the will. It can be done within 12 months. You can have a discussion in every region and then spend the last 2 months having a general discussion, and then we can actually move forward as a nation. So that really is my hope for our section. Of course, the capacity and the technical capacities, and as well as the expertise and experts from individuals internationally will help. But as a people, if we don't have a common vision and a common goal, no amount of foreigners, no amount of all due respect, fellow panelists, no amount of as I said, of recommendations will move us forward unless we as a country decide to move forward together.
Thank you, Mr. Patterson. I'll now turn the floor over to Mr. Sanzillo.
The contract, as I see it, is maximizes the opportunity for corruption. For all the reasons that we've just given, the more times the more time these claims and these transactions have to take place, the greater the opportunity there is for mishandling of claims. So you have a basic problem there. But so what I would say is that I agree with what Valerie said on the audits and competitive bidding and controls on cronyism. There's a method that's been used that might want to look into. It's called the Independent Private Sector Inspector Generals, and it's where a entity is established to work with a government or a government agency, and they are kind of an internal control officer. They work with management and in an environment where there is a commitment to integrity and high ethical standards. The process is carried out one way. Where there is a lack of that, the process is carried out another way, so that the monitor or receiver is set up in a way where if the process goes awry, people go to jail. And it's a quick and immediate, and there's a due process, but it goes to court, and that's how the system is set up. I could show you. It's been done. It's done regularly in the United States. It's done all over the world. In fact, usually in instances where corporations have had corruption problems or governments have had corruption problems. I've been a monitor myself, court-appointed monitor. But that might be one way to sort of really be serious about the corruption issue, because it would be involved with the procurements and the audits and where corruption takes place in the details of the administration. You have somebody there watching it regularly. And then I would just say that the general thing, which I appreciated Mr. Patterson today's comments, is that there is an acknowledgement of the problem, a full scope acknowledgement of the problem, and that's a real important place to start. There was questions and discussions there on transparency. I think that's another way to proceed. And then the third is on the kinds of solutions. I think there needs to be more discussions on those, and I'm encouraged by the discussion today. Maybe we can advance some more of the things that we've learned and make some suggestions that might be constructive. I don't know, but we may try. So today helped me a lot, and I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sanzillo. Ms. Janke, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Kiana. In terms of the oil curse, I'm not going to say very much about that because others have covered it. And really, there is no country that has escaped the oil curse. So if you don't want the oil curse, then you don't do oil. You don't build a country's future on a declining market. In terms of what should people do, we have strong laws in this country that protect the Guyanese people, protect the Guyanese environment, protect the Guyanese economy from the abuses of oil and gas development. And I know that David said that, the Environmental Protection Act is 1996. Yes, it's 1996. It also happens to be visionary. It also already covers the impacts of oil and gas. You don't have an Environmental Protection Act that deals with oil and gas. You have an Environmental Protection Act that deals with the impacts of development, of which oil and gas is merely one subset. We don't have one for gold. We don't have one for agriculture. We don't have one for wildlife. We don't have one for timber. Because you look at the impact on the environment. Is there an impact on the climate? It's covered in the Environmental Protection Act. Are there impacts on the oceans? Covered in the Environmental Impact, covered in the Environmental Protection Act. Is there public participation? Yes. Public rights to information? Yes. Do the public have a right to say what conditions they want on the environmental permits? Yes. It's all there. Right now, under the Environmental Protection Act, the permits for Liza 1, Liza 2, and Payara look to me to be illegal because they did not meet the requirements of the Act. We're hearing about the dumping of the produced water. That should not have been allowed, and that's a failure by the Environmental Protection Agency. When you look at the EIA, it says things like, the most commonly observed fish is the unidentified flying fish. Which competent agency would accept that kind of nonsense? So the problem is not in the legislation. The problem is the refusal to implement the legislation and the failure and refusal of successive governments, because we're not being party political here. Successive governments have failed to give the EPA the resources that it needs. And this $185 million that is sitting in a fund somewhere, a good chunk of that should go into the EPA to ensure that they can regulate what ExxonMobil is doing, Exxon and its partners, and protect Guyana. We have good legal grounds for saying that the oil and gas is already being regulated, is already covered in the legislation. That's why the World Bank wanted Exxon's lawyers to dismantle Guyana's Environmental Protection Act, because it puts a brake on what ExxonMobil and the other oil companies can do. We stopped that. The lawyers are no longer involved in that project, but it's going to take a lot more than that. There are good legal grounds to say that this $460 million in pre-contract costs, that there's no legal basis for it. It's not covered by Section 10 of the Petroleum Exploration and Production Act. I asked the minister what he's relying on. No answer. The Petroleum Agreement, there are grounds for challenging provisions in that. I already told you that the flaring is illegal. It should be challenged in court. The environmental impact assessments are inadequate. They don't meet the law. Now, the Constitution of Guyana says sovereignty belongs to the people who exercise it through their elected representatives. When the elected representatives fail the people, then the people need to act. We have strong laws. The important thing now is for people to use those laws before the governments decide to dismantle them. It's really important that people now use the laws that are there and don't allow anybody to tell them that they don't have rights, because they do have rights. They have rights to information, rights to participation, and if they don't like the results of what is going on, they have the right to go to court and stop it. And as you know, recently we went to court and the permits were reduced to bring them in line with the existing regulations. So it's really important that people understand, if you want to protect Guyana from abuse by the oil and gas sector, you are going to need to go to court to do it.
Thank you very much for that contribution, and to the rest of the members of the panel. I want to thank you for your profound contributions. This has truly been an enlightening event. And to our viewers and listeners, wherever you are, I want to thank you as well for participating as usual. And I would like to take this time to wish you all, as well as the distinguished members of our panel, a happy and prosperous new year. And I do hope that you continue to stay tuned to the Kaieteur Radio as we continue to have these insightful discussions on the importance of protecting Guyana's oil and gas sector, and the importance of just harping on the importance of educating our brothers and sisters. To our panel, once again, thank you so much for being part of this initiative. So, and I do wish you a happy new year and a wonderful day, guys.
Thank you very much, Kiana.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, and Happy New Year to you and your listeners and my fellow panelists. It's been a pleasure, and I hope that 2021 it's be a fruitful and productive year for all.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, viewers and listeners. Thank you very much, Kiana and fellow panelists. Good
Thanks.
wishes to you all.
Thank you very much. Do have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
You all.